Hello, I'm Roger Braveheart, and a very warm welcome to the 22-Minute Stories channel. Today, I'll be taking you through Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, a timeless and unforgettable story of young love, family hatred, rash decisions, fate, and tragedy. I'd really welcome your suggestions. If there are any classic books or plays you'd like me to cover in the future, please let me know in the comments. So, whether you are studying this at college, looking for something thoughtful to listen to on a busy commute, or simply want a relaxing bedtime story, this video is for you. Okay, so without further delay, let's get cracking. The play opens with a prologue delivered by the chorus, which establishes the setting and the central conflict of the story. In the fair city of Verona, two noble families of equal social standing are locked in an ancient, deep-seated feud. This long-standing grudge has recently erupted into new violence, causing civil unrest and staining the hands of the citizens with the blood of their neighbours. From these two opposing households, two ill-fated lovers are born under an unlucky star. The prologue reveals that their passionate but doomed love will ultimately lead to their tragic deaths. It is only through this devastating loss that the fierce hatred between their parents will finally be brought to an end, burying their long-standing strife. The chorus explains that the fearful journey of their love, marked by death, and the relentless anger of their families, which nothing but their children's end could resolve, will be the focus of the performance. The audience is invited to listen patiently as the actors strive to bring this tragic tale to life on the stage, filling in any details that the opening words might have missed. The story begins in a public place in Verona, where servants of the Capulet family, armed with swords and shields, engage in a battle of words that quickly escalates. When servants of the Montague family arrive, a provocative gesture sparks a physical fight. Benvolio, a Montague kinsman, attempts to break up the brawl, but the fiery Capulet Tybalt arrives and challenges him, declaring his hatred for peace and all Montagues. The conflict draws in citizens and the heads of both households, Capulet and Montague, who are eager to join the fray despite their wives' protests. The chaos is halted by Prince Aeschylus, who angrily declares that this is the third civil brawl sparked by casual remarks. He warns that any future disturbance of Verona's streets will be punished by death. After the crowd disperses, Montague and his wife ask Benvolio about their son, Romeo, who has been seen wandering alone in a melancholy state, weeping and shutting himself in his darkened chamber. Benvolio promises to discover the cause of his cousin's sorrow. Upon questioning Romeo, Benvolio learns that his cousin is deeply in love with a woman who has sworn a vow of chastity, leaving him in despair. Benvolio advises Romeo to forget her by looking at other beautiful realities, but Romeo insists this will only remind him of her unique beauty. Meanwhile, Paris, a young nobleman, asks Capulet for permission to marry his daughter Juliet. Capulet hesitates, noting she is not yet 14, but invites Paris to an annual feast that evening. Capulet sends a servant with a guest list, but the illiterate servant must ask Romeo to read it, unwittingly revealing that Romeo's unrequited love, Rosaline, will attend. Benvolio urges Romeo to go so he can compare her to other beauties, and Romeo agrees to attend merely to gaze upon his love. In the Capulet household, Lady Capulet and the talkative nurse discuss Juliet's age, confirming she is nearly 14. Lady Capulet introduces the prospect of marriage, revealing that the noble Paris seeks Juliet's hand. She urges Juliet to examine Paris at the upcoming feast, comparing him to a beautiful unbound book that only lacks a cover. Juliet obediently agrees to look at him with an open mind, though she will not let her interest go further than her parents' consent allows. Meanwhile, Romeo, Mercutio, and Benvolio prepare to crash the Capulet feast wearing masks. Romeo remains heavy-hearted, claiming his soul of lead prevents him from dancing. Mercutio tries to cheer him with a long, imaginative speech about Queen Mab, the fairy's midwife who delivers dreams to sleeping humans, arguing that dreams are merely the idle fantasies of a restless brain. Romeo admits he fears some terrible consequence, destined to end in untimely death, is set in motion by this night's revels, but he yields to the guidance of fate. At the feast, Capulet welcomes his guests and encourages everyone to dance. Romeo's eyes are suddenly drawn to Juliet, whose extraordinary beauty immediately captivates him, making him forget his previous love entirely. However, Tybalt recognizes Romeo's voice and is outraged by the presence of a Montague. Tybalt prepares to attack, but Capulet restrains him, praising Romeo's reputation as a virtuous youth and refusing to allow a disturbance in his home. Tybalt reluctantly backs down, but vows revenge. Romeo approaches Juliet, and through a playful, poetic exchange comparing their hands and lips to pilgrims and saints, they share a kiss. Their joy is cut short when the nurse reveals Juliet's identity to Romeo, and later Romeo's identity to Juliet, leaving both devastated to learn they have fallen in love with their family's enemy. After the feast, Romeo is unable to leave the Capulet estate, feeling that his heart remains where Juliet is. He climbs the wall into the Capulet garden, seeking to find her. His friends Benvolio and Mercutio call out to him, with Mercutio mockingly calling upon Romeo's passion and invoking the name of his former love, Rosaline, to draw him out. Believing Romeo has simply gone to bed or hidden himself among the trees to be one with the dark night, they eventually give up and depart. From his hiding place in the garden, Romeo overhears Mercutio's jests and remarks that those who have never felt a wound are quick to laugh at scars. Suddenly, Juliet appears at a high window. Romeo compares her to the rising sun, far brighter and more beautiful than the envious moon. Unaware of his presence, Juliet speaks her thoughts aloud, lamenting the conflict between their families. She questions the significance of a name, famously declaring that a rose would smell just as sweet by any other name, and begs Romeo to cast off his family name in exchange for her entire self. Hearing this, Romeo reveals himself, declaring his willingness to be baptized anew and abandon his name for her love. Juliet is startled, but quickly recognizes his voice. She warns him of the mortal danger he faces if her kinsmen find him in the garden, but Romeo insists that love's wings allowed him to overleap the walls, and that her eyes pose a greater danger than 20 of their swords. Juliet confesses her deep affection, admitting she is embarrassed that he overheard her private thoughts, but promising to prove more true than those who play hard to get. They exchange vows of love, and Juliet promises to send a messenger the next day to arrange their marriage. At dawn, Friar Lawrence gathers herbs and flowers, musing on the dual nature of plants, which can contain both healing medicine and deadly poison, much like the capacity for good and evil within human beings. Romeo arrives, still awake from the night before, and confesses his love for Juliet, asking the friar to marry them that very day. The friar is astonished by how quickly Romeo has abandoned his obsession with Rosaline, chiding him for doting rather than truly loving. However, he agrees to assist Romeo, hoping that this holy alliance might finally turn the bitter feud between the Capulets and Montagues into pure love. Meanwhile, Benvolio and Mercutio discuss a challenge that Tybalt has sent to Romeo's father's house. Mercutio describes Tybalt as a highly skilled and precise duelist, questioning if the love-struck Romeo is in any condition to face him. When Romeo joins them, Mercutio engages him in a rapid battle of wits, pleased to see his friend has returned to his usual sociable self. The nurse and her servant Peter arrive, seeking Romeo. Mercutio teases the nurse mercilessly before departing with Benvolio. Romeo instructs the nurse to tell Juliet to find a way to attend confession at Friar Lawrence's cell that afternoon, where they will be married. He also arranges for his servant to deliver a rope ladder so he can climb to Juliet's chamber later that night. The nurse returns to Juliet, who has been waiting anxiously for hours. The nurse playfully delays delivering the news, complaining of her aching bones and breathlessness, before finally telling Juliet to hasten to the cell. There, Friar Lawrence counsels the lovers to love moderately before performing the secret marriage ceremony. On a hot day in Verona, Benvolio urges Mercutio to retire, warning that the Capulets are abroad and that a brawl is inevitable in such heat. Mercutio laughs off the warning, accusing Benvolio of being just as quick to quarrel over trivial matters as anyone else. Tybalt and his companions arrive, searching for Romeo. Tybalt demands a word, and Mercutio immediately provokes him, offering to exchange words for blows. Benvolio begs them to withdraw to a private place or reason calmly, but Mercutio refuses to budge. When Romeo arrives, Tybalt turns his attention to him, calling him a villain. Romeo, newly married to Juliet, and now viewing the Capulets as family, refuses to fight. He calmly protests that he has never injured Tybalt and values the Capulet name as dearly as his own. Mercutio is disgusted by what he sees as Romeo's dishonourable submission. He draws his sword and challenges Tybalt himself. Romeo desperately tries to intervene, calling on Benvolio to help beat down their weapons and reminding them of the prince's strict ban on street fighting. As Romeo steps between them to part the combatants, Tybalt reaches under Romeo's arm and fatally stabs Mercutio before fleeing with his followers. Mercutio, realizing his wound is mortal, curses both families, famously crying out that they have made worms meat of him. After Mercutio is carried away, Romeo is filled with guilt, believing Juliet's beauty has made him effeminate and softened his courage. Benvolio returns with the news of Mercutio's death. When Tybalt returns in triumph, Romeo's grief turns to fury. He challenges Tybalt, declaring that one of them must join Mercutio's soul. They fight, and Romeo kills Tybalt. Benvolio urges Romeo to flee before the citizens and the prince arrive. Romeo escapes just as the prince, the Capulets, and the Montagues gather. Benvolio explains the events, but Lady Capulet demands Romeo's death. The prince sentences Romeo to immediate exile. Juliet waits impatiently in her chamber for nightfall, eager for Romeo's arrival so they can consummate their marriage. Her romantic anticipation is shattered when the nurse enters, weeping and wringing her hands. In her grief, the nurse's words are confused, leading Juliet to believe that Romeo has been killed. When the nurse finally clarifies that Tybalt is dead and Romeo has been banished for killing him, Juliet is torn by conflicting emotions. She initially curses Romeo as a beautiful tyrant and a fiend hid behind a fair face, but she quickly repents, refusing to allow the nurse to speak ill of her husband. Juliet realizes that Tybalt would have killed Romeo had Romeo not slain him first. However, the word banished fills her with absolute despair, feeling it is a tragedy far worse than the deaths of 10,000 Tybalts. Seeing her mistress's agony, the nurse promises to find Romeo, knowing he is hiding at Friar Lawrence's cell, and Juliet gives her a ring to deliver to him as a token of her love. Meanwhile, at the cell, Friar Lawrence informs Romeo of the prince's sentence of banishment. Romeo reacts with horror, declaring that exile is far worse than death, as it removes him from Juliet's presence. He falls to the ground in tears, refusing the friar's attempts to offer comfort through philosophy. The nurse arrives and describes Juliet's matching grief. Desperate, Romeo draws his sword to kill himself, but the friar restrains him, fiercely chiding him for his unmanly behaviour. The friar outlines a plan. Romeo must go to Juliet's chamber to comfort her, but leave before the watch is set to escape to Mantua. There, he will live until they can announce the marriage, reconcile the families, and secure a pardon from the prince. Late on Monday evening, Capulet, Lady Capulet, and Paris discuss Juliet's deep grief over Tybalt's death, which has prevented them from discussing Paris's suit. Believing that a sudden joyful event will ease her sorrow, Capulet makes a desperate offer, promising Paris that Juliet will be ruled by his wishes. He schedules their wedding for the upcoming Thursday, instructing his wife to prepare Juliet for the ceremony. Meanwhile, Romeo and Juliet spend their secret night together. At dawn, they reluctantly prepare to part, debating whether the bird they hear is the nightingale of the night or the lark of the morning. Juliet begs Romeo to stay, but when he points out the growing light and warns that staying means death, she urges him to flee. As Romeo descends from her window, Juliet is seized by a dark premonition, imagining she sees him looking pale like a corpse in a tomb. Lady Capulet enters and finds Juliet weeping, assuming her tears are for Tybalt. She vows to send a poisoner to Mantua to execute Romeo, and Juliet plays along with double-edged words. Lady Capulet then delivers the news of the planned marriage to Paris. Juliet flatly refuses, declaring she would rather marry Romeo, whom her mother knows she hates, than Paris. Capulet enters and is outraged by Juliet's refusal and lack of gratitude. He unleashes a torrent of anger, calling her a disobedient wretch and threatening to drag her to church or disown her, leaving her to starve in the streets if she does not comply. Juliet begs her mother for pity, but is rejected. Turning to the nurse for comfort, Juliet is devastated when the nurse advises her to forget the banished Romeo and marry Paris, praising him as far superior. Juliet pretends to agree, but vows never to trust the nurse again, resolving to seek the friar's help or take her own life. At Friar Lawrence's cell, Paris discusses the upcoming Thursday wedding with the friar, explaining that Capulet is rushing the marriage to help Juliet overcome her grief. Juliet arrives, and though Paris speaks to her with possessive affection, she answers him with clever, evasive remarks. Once Paris departs, Juliet falls into despair, begging the friar for a way to prevent the marriage. She draws a knife, declaring she will kill herself rather than be unfaithful to Romeo. Seeing her desperate resolve, the friar proposes a highly risky plan. He gives her a vial containing a special distilled liquor. He instructs her to go home, give her consent to marry Paris, and ensure she sleeps alone on Wednesday night. Upon drinking the potion, she will fall into a death-like state for 42 hours, with no pulse, breath, or colour. Her family will believe she is dead and place her in the ancient Capulet tomb. Meanwhile, the friar will send a letter to Romeo in Mantua, and together they will watch her wake and carry her away to safety. Juliet eagerly accepts the vial, declaring that love will give her strength. She returns home and kneels before her father, begging for forgiveness and falsely claiming she has repented of her disobedience. Overjoyed by her sudden submission, Capulet decides to move the wedding up to Wednesday morning. Juliet and the nurse retire to her chamber to select her wedding attire. Juliet asks to be left alone for the night, claiming she needs to pray. Alone in her room, she is seized by a cold fear. She contemplates the terrifying possibilities that the potion might not work, that it might be actual poison, or that she might wake early in the tomb and go mad from the horrors of the vault before Romeo arrives. Overcoming her terror, she drinks the potion. The Capulet household is filled with bustling activity throughout the night as Capulet, Lady Capulet, and the nurse prepare for the wedding feast. Capulet is in high spirits, directing servants, ordering spices, and supervising the cooks. At dawn, hearing Paris approaching with musicians, Capulet orders the nurse to go and awaken Juliet and prepare her for the ceremony while he goes to chat with the bridegroom. The nurse enters Juliet's chamber and playfully calls out to her, teasing her for being asleep at bed. However, as she draws back the curtains, she is horrified to find Juliet fully dressed but completely unresponsive. The nurse shrieks in terror, crying out that Juliet is dead. Lady Capulet rushes in, followed quickly by Capulet, and both are devastated by the sight of their cold, stiff daughter. Capulet laments that death has taken his heir and deflowered his bride on the eve of her wedding. Paris and Friar Lawrence arrive with the musicians, only to be met with cries of grief. Paris is heartbroken, feeling utterly betrayed and ruined by death, while Lady Capulet and the nurse wail in inconsolable sorrow. Friar Lawrence steps in to calm the family, chiding them for their excessive grief. He reminds them that heaven now holds Juliet's soul, which is a far greater promotion than any earthly marriage could have offered. He urges them to dry their tears, place rosemary on her body, and prepare to carry her to the church for her funeral. Capulet sadly commands that all the wedding preparations, the instruments, the feast, the flowers, and the hymns be turned into their solemn, melancholy opposites for a funeral. The scene ends with a lighter, bittersweet exchange between the musicians and the servant Peter, who demands they play a comforting tune to ease his grief. In Mantua, Romeo is in a cheerful mood after a dream of Juliet finding him dead and reviving him with kisses, his joy is shattered when his servant Balthazar arrives from Verona with the news that Juliet is dead and buried in the Capulet tomb. Devastated, Romeo defies the stars and resolves to return to Verona that night to lie beside her. He seeks out a poor apothecary, offering 40 ducats for a swift-acting poison. Although the apothecary hesitates due to Mantua's strict laws, his extreme poverty compels him to accept. Meanwhile, Friar Lawrence learns from Friar John that the letter explaining Juliet's faked death was never delivered to Romeo because John was quarantined due to an outbreak of plague. Realizing the danger, Lawrence hastens to the tomb to be there when Juliet awakens. At the churchyard, Paris arrives to strew flowers on Juliet's grave. He is interrupted by Romeo, who arrives with Balthazar to break open the tomb. Romeo dismisses Balthazar, warning him to stay away on pain of death. Paris recognizes Romeo as the banished Montague who killed Tybalt and attempts to apprehend him. Romeo begs Paris to leave, but Paris refuses, and they fight. Romeo kills Paris, whose dying wishes to be laid beside Juliet. Romeo carries Paris into the tomb, where he gazes upon Juliet's still beautiful face. He drinks the poison and dies with a kiss. Friar Lawrence arrives and finds Paris and Romeo dead. Juliet awakens and asks for Romeo, but the friar, hearing the watch approaching, begs her to flee. When she refuses, he runs away in fear. Juliet discovers the empty cup in Romeo's hand and, finding no poison left, kisses his warm lips. She then takes his dagger and stabs herself, falling dead on his body. The watch arrives, followed by the prince, the Capulets, and Montague, whose wife has died of grief. Friar Lawrence explains the secret marriage and the tragic chain of events, which is confirmed by Romeo's letter. Moved by the tragedy, Capulet and Montague finally end their feud, promising to raise golden statues in honour of their children. I believe that through this devastating tragedy, the play highlights the destructive and senseless nature of long-standing hatred and societal division. By presenting a conflict where the original cause of the feud is never even explained, the text suggests that such animosities are often maintained out of blind tradition rather than any rational grievance. I think the author is drawing attention to how the bitter grudges of the older generation can poison the lives of the young, ultimately destroying the very things they hold most dear. The tragic deaths of the lovers serve as a harsh warning about the consequences of failing to seek peace and reconciliation. Furthermore, I believe the story highlights the dangers of extreme impulsiveness and the lack of moderate guidance. The characters frequently act on intense, unchecked emotions, whether it is Romeo's sudden shifts in affection, Tybalt's fiery pride, or the lover's rapid decision to marry. The friar's warning that violent delights have violent ends seems to be a central moral point, suggesting that unchecked passion, no matter how pure, can lead to ruin when divorced from reason. I think the play also criticizes the rigid social expectations of the time, particularly the patriarchal authority that forces Juliet into an unwanted marriage, leaving her with no choice but to resort to desperate measures. Ultimately, I believe the moral of the story is that love has the power to transcend hatred, but when society refuses to allow that love to exist openly, the cost of reconciliation is tragically high. The final reconciliation of the families over the golden statues of their children suggests that peace is always possible, but it is a bitter victory when bought with the lives of the innocent. Thank you for staying till the end. You obviously are a glutton for punishment. Please hit the like icon if you thought this video deserves it, so other people get to see it. Let me know in the comments which book you would like me to read to you next. Now YouTube have put on screen a channel subscribe icon, and below it my latest video for you to check out. See you next time.